Borthakur IAS Academy. Prostuti aru adhyayoner nirbhorjogyo thikona. Borthakur IAS Academy.
Everyone, welcome to the Hindu analysis for 30th June 2021. Let us begin with the first article today. Ensure that no migrant workers goes hungry, Supreme Court instructs government. The Supreme Court has been instructing the government of India to ensure a non-stop supply of food grains to the migrant workers, both who come under the PDS system and who do not come under the PDS system. Meaning the people who have ration card will get the distribution of food grain to them without hindrance. And even if the person doesn't have a ration card or doesn't have an identity card in him, on him, with him, the government must ensure that they are given food grains. Now, this stance was adopted by the Supreme Court of India to prevent hunger deaths that were happening during the migrant crisis in the first wave of coronavirus pandemic and the second wave of coronavirus pandemic. Now, as a part of those set of deliberations and judgments, subsequent judgments that will have to be followed there, the court has set a July 31st deadline for the states to implement One Nation, One Ration card. The One Nation, One Ration card program was brought in by the central government 1 year back, indicating that irrespective of where the person has gotten his ration card from, irrespective of where his origin state is, if he has a ration card, he or she can get their allotted ration from any shop in the world, and nobody is supposed to prevent that from happening. States like West Bengal and Delhi are the last ones to implement it. Even in the case of West Bengal, the West Bengal High Court and the Supreme Court had given last warnings to both the central government and state government. In those instances, state governments stating that the state government of West Bengal has to implement the One Nation, One Nation card without delay and cannot prevent anybody from denying the food grains that a person or a woman is allocated under the PDS scheme. Delhi is also struggling to implement the One Nation, One Ration card for their own reasons, but nonetheless, in a final say of judgment, or in a final say of, it's a kind of a final warning from the Supreme Court of India stating that July 31st is your last date to implement the central government scheme, or you will be in the contempt of court. As far as the second thing the Supreme Court has been asking, and central government has been able to listen to those arguments too, but nonetheless failed to implement or realize it in time, is the National Database for Unorganized Workers, that is a database for migrant workers. Now the court has been asking updates regarding the development of the portal itself. Earlier, when the last update was given, it was attributed to failure of officers to come up with the necessary resources to build the portal itself or augment the portal itself. Now you have to understand that the Supreme Court is pretty much unhappy with the way that portal is being progressing. Now the court has also asked the government of India, that is the central government, to ensure that the digital divide that we are currently seeing in India does not become a roadblock in people registering for the National Database for Unorganized Sector. Now the court has ordered to finalize the court has ordered the ministry to finalize the National Database for Unorganized Workers module, and they want it to be implemented without any delay. So that is what the issue has been going on between the central government, state governments and the Supreme Court. Moving on to the next article, government gives nod for Cipla to import Moderna's vaccine. This is a welcome development in India's fight against COVID-19. Current basket of vaccines that India has are three. One is Covaxin, manufactured by Bharat Biotech; Covishield, which is an Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, manufactured by Serum Institute of India; and we have Sputnik B, which is developed by Russians, imported by Dr. Reddy's lab in Hyderabad. Now we have 3 vaccines, and we have been conducting or carrying out negotiations with 3 other manufacturers, particularly the Moderna ones, the Pfizer ones, and the Johnson & Johnson. Now, the Drug Controller General of India, DCGI, who has the authority to give permission for vaccines or any other medication in India, has finally granted permission to Cipla, which is a Mumbai-based pharma company, to import Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine, making it the 4th vaccine to get emergency authorization use in India. This was announced by Moderna through a social media post yesterday, stating that they have finally received official go-ahead for emergency use authorization in India, and this is again a welcome step towards fighting COVID-19 through vaccinations, because that is the only way that everybody agrees in the world, pretty much stating that vaccines are the only way out of COVID-19. Now, again, you have to keep in mind, we have 3 vaccines currently, but the number of the percentage of the number of vaccines that are being manufactured by 3 manufacturers, particularly Covaxin, Covishield, and Sputnik 5 or Sputnik B, are pretty low. They are trying to increase their capacities, where Covishield and Covaxin made agreements with 3 or 4 other pharma companies to manufacture the vaccine itself. Now, the vaccine that Moderna is going to sell through Cipla is going to be a direct import, meaning the vaccine is not manufactured in India. It will be manufactured by Moderna in other countries where they have their facilities. This is going to be a direct import which can be stored for 7 months under storage temperatures and 1 month under distribution temperatures. So this is again a challenge in India, because India doesn't have proper cold storage chains to store vaccines. One of the hurdles that we have been having in importing either the Pfizer vaccine or Johnson & Johnson vaccine since the initial stages is because India lacks the cold storage infrastructure to store those vaccines. And the reason why India has been more acceptance towards Sputnik or Covishield or Covaxin is the lower temperatures that will require to be stored under. As far as this thing, 70-30 is a good number, but nonetheless there are certain challenges involved in the storage and the transportation of the vaccines itself. But with these vaccines, it gives the government of India a lot of options, in the sense that where cold storage facilities are available, they can send Moderna vaccines, or in urban areas, since cold storage vaccines are storage facilities are highly available, they can concentrate or use Moderna vaccines for urban vaccination and direct the crucial resources of Covaxin, Covishield and Sputnik V to rural areas, because they don't need such critical conditions or colder temperatures to be stored. So this certainly helps and diversifies our vaccine basket. And again, this is a welcome step towards India's strive towards vaccinating its population by the end of 2022. But nonetheless, now we have 4 vaccines. As far as the Johnson & Johnson and Moderna vaccine, Pfizer vaccine are concerned, there is still no consensus as to if they will be given green emergency use authorization or not. Particularly in the case of Pfizer, you know what is the problem. The indemnity clause is the problem for Pfizer to send vaccines to India. As far as the Moderna thing is concerned, Indian government is hoping that they would manufacture these vaccines in India, but you have to remain skeptical as to whether this will be realized or not. This is the current situation in regards to vaccination in India. And as far as the green pass concern with the Covishield vaccine is concerned, remember, India will always have this problem in terms of gaining acceptance from foreign countries. From what I am hearing from one credible source particularly is that the reason that India's Covishield has been denied, this purely speculation, so let us not go there. So let us get so as far as the green pass thing for the Covishield, you can expect it to be given in a few days, because it has been raised at higher levels, as the CEO of Serum Institute said, and I think in a few days you are going to see that issue to be sorted out too. And as for the Covaxin being given the green signal at the World Health Organization, again There are certain things at play that are not relevant to us, but nonetheless, Covaxin is also going to be given the green signal at the World Health Organization also. So that is the vaccination issue in India and the number of vaccines that we have right now. Now moving on to the next article, case against Twitter for giving access to child porn. Now the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights have lodged a complaint stating that Twitter is being used, or Twitter is allowing access to child pornography on their microblogging platform. So before going into that, let us understand what are the policies of Twitter. Twitter has this weird policy with that they are okay with adult content being hosted on their platform. What they are also not okay with is with child pornography being hosted on their platform. But what the National Human Rights Commission Protection of Child Rights is saying is, though their policies are against child pornography, but irrespective of their own policy, they are allowing that content to be hosted, and they are not doing enough to control or entirely prevent such content to be posted on those platforms. So we have the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences POCSO Act and IT Act that prevents, or that makes it illegal to post or share such type of content, and it is a punishable offense. It not only penalizes the persons who are viewing it, sharing it, or uploading it, it also penalizes people who are allowing it to be transferred from one medium to the other or hosting it. I think Twitter is going through a really bad time in their face in India, because even the person who is actually supposed to be the head of India is saying, what the hell can I do in India if I have no power to do or say anything that matters? I think Twitter is going through a bad time. I think they should check their kundali with somebody in India so that they can do certain things and get this thing sorted out. So moving on to the next article, apt judicial reminder in era of over-criminalization. So remember a few days back where we specifically discussed about a Delhi High Court judgment regarding the definition of terrorism and UAPA Act, where the Supreme Court of India itself was appalled at the judgment that was given by the Delhi court in a bail hearing. That was the thing that was caught the attention of people that during that period of time. What was a bail hearing for 3 accused in a UAPA Act, which later on turned, instead of a bail hearing, into an entire rundown of the UAPA Act and an 110-page judgment coming out of the Delhi High Court. Now subsequently the Supreme Court of India took up the petition and said that this is the one and done case. You cannot reference this Delhi judgment in any other future cases, and you cannot use the same argument in future cases also, and put an end to that entire rundown 110-page judgment given by the Delhi High Court during that bail hearing. Now, the second aspect of it is questions are being asked, and questions have always been asked regarding the definition of what defines, or how do you define terrorism and a terrorist, particularly the word terrorism. The problem is nobody knows, there is no universal definition of terrorism. The Americans define it a different way, the UK defines it a different way, the Germans, the France, the Japanese had a unique definition of terrorism, but nonetheless every country has their own definition, and there is no universal consensus as to what defines or which act defines terrorism and who has the perfect definition for terrorism. Now, when you look at the legal disclosure of entire world as a whole, there are more than 100 definitions of terrorism that are available globally, and as far as no two countries accept the same definition of terrorism, particularly in India or at any international level. Now, the central body, when you talk about terrorism or whatever, is the United Nations General Assembly, which took up the task and constituted a committee to come up with a globally acceptable term for terrorism. The problem is, in 50 years, they could not reach a consensus as to what is the meaning of terrorism. Because if you set a standard, I think most of the American troops will be arrested on the charges of terrorism. Because the wars that Americans and the other countries are waging right now in other parts of the world, I'm pretty sure if the definition of the word terrorism is defined in accordance with global law, most of the country would be under lock and key. So they don't want that to happen because convenience. So nonetheless, let us get back into the article itself. There is no consensus as to what is the word terrorism. Over the period of time, Indian law at various points of time, depending on the situation, depending upon the case, depending upon the act, tried to come up with their own definition or their own understanding or their own explanation as to what the word terrorism or terrorist act means. One of the few landmark judgments that are given in this article are good, but the two that are pretty much important is the PUCL judgment in 2003, where the constitutionality of the POTA Act, that is Prevention of Terrorism Act, was under challenge in the Supreme Court. And this is where another dimension that nobody thought earlier in regards to terrorism or terrorist act was highlighted, where by including the terrorist act, by including within its meaning amongst other things raising of constitutional principles that we hold dear, tearing apart the secular fabric, and promotion of prejudice and bigotry. These three things were brought into the foray of definition of terrorism or a terrorist act in India. The other most important judgment in terms of understanding how courts have been interpreting or have their own interpretation of the word terrorism is in Ram Manohar Lohia case in 1966. The Apex Court explained the distinction between law and order, public order, and security of the state, where law and order represents the largest circle, within which is the next circle representing public order, and the smallest circle represents the security of the state. So the circle is outward, meaning it starts with the security of state at the center of the core of the security next circle. The next circle or the ring in the matrix of or the chart of security in state is public order, and finally you get the law and order. So in Indian law itself, there is a wide discrepancies in the definition and scope and meaning of terrorism and terrorist act. So the challenge has become when the government or the police slap UAPA charges on somebody, you cannot deny the fact, or you cannot merely throw out the case stating that doesn't fit the definition, or the act under which they are being booked, or the action for which they are being slapped with UAPA does not fit the definition of terrorism, so we are going to throw out this case. That cannot happen in India, because according to section 15 of the UAPA Act itself, it merely defines a terrorist act in widely extreme and vague words. See, it is not a criticism of the act itself. The act has been used a lot in the past decade. This is not an government issue. This is not an ruling dispensation issue. It's an issue with the law itself, where depending upon who is in power, they are using it to quell or silence critics. So it defines the word in the section 15 of UAPA itself. The terrorist act is defined as an act with intent to threaten or likely to threaten the unity, integrity, security, or sovereignty of India, or with intent to strike terror or likely to strike terror in the people. So on the looks of it, it is clean and simple. You know what, if somebody is threatening the unity, integrity, security, and sovereignty of India, or trying to terrorize the people of our country, or likely to strike terror, happens chance in future if the conduct is such that it may lead to strike terror in people of India, then they can be charged under the UAP Act. It looks clean and simple, but the problem or the devil lies in the detail. which act can be or cannot be defined as an intent to threaten or likely threaten the unity of India or integrity of India or security of India or sovereignty of India. So that is where the problem comes with how you choose to interpret, because when you're booking a person under the UAPA Act, it is entirely up to the police or the person who is booking that person or charging that person with that section 15. It depends on how he interprets the act. It doesn't matter how the person who is being accused of some activity that may attract UAPA charge against him or her, but it depends on the officer or the police force particularly, who is initiating that act. So that's a big challenge that has to be addressed nonetheless, because this vagueness may lead to a lot of division in the understanding of the judicial process itself, and it may lead to a lot of misuse from both the governments and the police force and the security establishment. And this may be used, that there is a lot of fear that it is already being used, but it may be used to settle scores. So that is the issue with lack of a clear-cut definition. And the other side of the discussion or the argument is, you cannot narrow down the definition of terrorism or a terrorist, because the ever-changing field of the terrorism itself, it's not a 9 to 5 o'clock job. It's not like that you are going to come, log into your computer, do the necessary, log out of your computer by 5 and go home and sleep. The nature of the terrorism or the field of terrorism, it's career option. It's not a career option like some other thing. It's an identity thing. So the ever-evolving nature of the terrorism or a terrorist or the acts of terrorism prevents our judiciary or our government or any other government in the world or any other judiciary system in the world to come up with a straitjacket definition for terrorism. So look at the recent act of terrorism where a drone has been used. So does that come under the use of technology, or does that come under the use of explosives part of it? Under which part of the act itself are going to slap the UAPA Act or anti-terrorism rules against the persons who perpetrated it? So when the act that you are trying to try or convict somebody under itself is without definition, the legal precedents that you set to try those people under may not have a square box that everything fits into nicely. So that is why this ambiguity exists, and that is why this confusion exists, and that ambiguity and that confusion leads to a lot of misunderstandings of the law itself. I use the word misunderstandings carefully here. Misunderstanding gives the benefit of doubt to other person. But in law, benefit of doubt does not translate into a person being innocent or guilty. So once a person is slapped with the UAPA charges, the implications are going to long lasting than everybody thinks. So it's up to the judiciary itself and the legislative bodies to come up with a definition that allows for the flexibility that it needs to try and convict terrorists, while also putting in enough safeguards so that people who do not quantify to be tried under the UAPA but may be tried under any other section of the law, or outrightly innocent people, do not fall victim to the ambiguity in the law itself. You have to take that possibility into account also. People may be guilty but not under the UAPA Act but any other act of the land, law of the land. Not everybody who doesn't fit under the UAPA definition or who doesn't come under the ambit of UAPA are innocent. They might be guilty, but they cannot be tried under UAPA because that act does not call for UAPA Act, but any other act in the law. So you have to be careful in that. It's the discussion itself is fraught with so many ambiguities. It becomes too hard and difficult to come out with a definition or come out with a logic-based argument. So while you are writing answer also, be smart enough not to go into the emotional aspect of it or the argumentative aspect of it. Just quote the basis under which the current law operates under and end your answer. Don't go into the moral argument of it. That is why that is the reason that I chose this article, because in the past 10 or 15 minutes that we have been having discussions on is based on just 2 cases that the entire thing is based on. So when you are writing answer, be careful as to not to stray away from the facts of the case or the basis of the law, so that you don't waste time when you are answer writing and get confused and make your own opinions present. So moving on to the next article, Mendes's anti-torture vision is still distant for India. Now, torture has been, or use of torture has been, acceptable and semi-acceptable depending on the time, place and whom it is being meted out to or given out to in India. There is no set principles as to, there is let me start with this. Torture in any form is bad. Despite whatever your personal opinions are, whatever the belief systems are, torture is bad. The international law does not agree with it. The national law does not agree with it. But the problem comes with the grey area that falls between those lines. So in 2020, Mr. Mendes is the rapporteur for torture in United Nations. And in an effort to combat torture during investigation, a study and a program that was spearheaded by Mr. Mendes came in with a new proposal to counter torture with some new set of investigation principles based on empirical evidence that torture does not work. Now in 2020, he launched the principles of effective interviewing for investigations and information gathering, which were rightly dubbed the Mendes principles. Now what are these Mendes principles? Mendes principles aim is to provide a cohesive blueprint for practical measures to replace torture and coercive interrogation. Now they want to replace it with a rapport-based interviews reinforced through legal and procedural safeguards at every step of the way. What do these Mendes principles offer? These Mendes principles offer practical guidance for non-coercive interrogations, address heightened vulnerabilities in custody, provide scientific guidance on training, accountability and implementation, and the Mendes principles, if adopted, are applicable to all authorities who have the power to detain and question people, including the police, military and intelligence agencies. India suffers with high number of suicidal custodial deaths. In the recent high-profile case that happened was in a father and a son were subjected to torture in the jails of Kerala, and they subsequently died because of the injuries that were inflicted during the interrogation. There are certain things that India suffers from, India has issues with, and one of those things is use of force to get confessions or to get truth, as the author of this article puts, out from accused or criminals. Now, who is Juan E. Mendes? He is, as I said earlier, he is a former UN Special Rapporteur on torture, who was personally tortured by the intelligence officers of Argentina, particularly during the military junta period in 1970s. So if anybody is talking about torture, I think he is a qualified person, because he was extensively tortured for intelligence by security forces during the turbulent times of 1970 in Argentina. Now the understanding is that worldwide, as the Americans, they are the best in waterboarding, and they have been successfully waterboarding people since waterboarding began. So extreme torture tactics such as force, stress positions or waterboarding have been showing to significantly damage the affected person's memory and recollection of information. This is a scientific proof. Even the American security agencies agrees that if a person is sustained to long periods of waterboarding or coercion techniques, they tend to develop mental problems. They tend to develop psychological issues. Since then, they are using other techniques, but those techniques are also coercion techniques. But coming back to the article itself, now this argument that extreme torture tactics do not work and they are detrimental to the person's health or the criminal's health or the accused's health is true because it is grounded in scientific studies across disciplines, because there are ample psychological studies, criminology studies, sociology studies, neuroscience studies that establish that coercive interrogation techniques are counterproductive, meaning they do not work and they cause more damage than good. Now, coercive, there is this perception from the security agencies also that coercive interrogation methods or interviewing methods lead to unreliable information and false confessions. When a person is under undue pressure and under extreme amounts of pain, just to make that pain or that pressure stop, they might confess, they might give out or blurt out false information just to make the interviewer stop that pressure. Now, these studies that were conducted over long periods of time dispel the perception that when a person is put under a degree of certain pressure or physical pain, they might give out accurate information is false. So, in spite of prohibition of and safeguards against third degree methods, the third degree method is everybody knows in India. Police use, but third degree is the method that police employ on the criminals and accused to get information out of. So the author says the third degree method in India is a normalized practice in the police forces of India, and the author went on to say that the National Human Rights Commission has even said that custodial violence and torture is so rampant in this country that it has become almost routine. There are instances that we read from time to time in newspapers where the police have been accused of using of excessive force to get a confession out of a criminal or an accused. So what is the solution here? The solution is to shift police thinking and try to adopt more of the principles that were set by the Juan Mendes, and try to wean Indian police from those coercive tactics into a more rapport-based interrogation tactics. So moving on to the next article, India values religious freedom, not integration. I suggest you go to the website. They have laid out this study in 8 or 9 simple points with 8 or 9 different data sets. It's moot to discuss this in numbers, but it's just for awareness sake. I humbly suggest you go to the website, their Pew Research website, Pew Religion, go to the Twitter page or any other page, you'll find this research. Don't study this research from newspapers. Go to their official website and read that. Moving on to the next article, cyber skills being used for terror, says Stringler. So, on Monday, a report was released by International Institute of Strategic Studies that assessed cyber powers of 15 countries. And in that grading, India was listed as third tier cyber power because it had focused its cyber intelligence and offensive capabilities too narrowly on Pakistan alone and not other global threats. I think we are too concentrated on Pakistan and we are leaving other global threats, China and other countries, out of the equation, and that is why we were given a third tier rating. Now, as a response to it or in lieu of that, on Tuesday, India accused certain countries of using cyberspace expertise to conduct cross-border terrorism. They did not name the countries, but nonetheless, we know which countries they are talking about. And at United Nations Security Council on Tuesday, Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla said that there was widespread concerns that both state and non-state actors were now manipulating ICT, information and communication technology products. And this comes the following report that have claimed that have stated earlier, and a claim from India's cybersecurity capabilities were weak. And in a year when the government of India itself came out and said that there had been a 300% increase in cyber attacks on Indian infrastructures, we went in detail how not only we should be protecting military infrastructures or strategic infrastructure, we have to also protect civilian infrastructure. And where several power grids were accessed, particularly the Mumbai case and the recently Air India database breach. Now this is the government of India stand, and that is the report that India is responding to. So moving on to the next article. She honors PLA soldier killed in Galwan Valley. So this, as I said, China is going to celebrate the 100-year anniversary of the foundation of the Chinese Communist Party in the next few days. And ahead of those celebrations, they are celebrating the PLA achievements in the year around. Now, the important thing that we are going to discuss in this article is building border villages. Now, since 2017, Xi Jinping has pushed a plan or has been concentrating and diverting a lot of sources into this plan to build moderately well-off villages in border areas. Under this scheme, they have successfully built 628 villages so far in mostly borders along India and Bhutan, and that too in occupied territory in the case of Bhutan and in India. The idea is that the government of China wants to build model villages in disputed border areas and claim that disputed border territory as their own. They are trying to shift population from central parts of China and the tribal people of regional tribal people of China, who are animal rearers, into these model villages and settlements to claim that territory for themselves. So from that perspective, we are discussing this article. Please do a read up on what are these border villages and where these border villages are coming from and why they are significant in terms of claiming territory or usurping territory, that is disputed territory from either India or Bhutan. Moving on to the next article, Israel's Lapid opens embassy in UAE. So since the signing of Abraham Accords, which were signed under the leadership of US President Donald Trump, Sudan, Morocco have normalized ties with Israel. You have UAE, Bahrain and Saudi Arabia also having normalizing ties. In a part of that Abraham Accords, Israel has inaugurated country's embassy in UAE. Now this is important because this brings Israel and UAE a step closer to normalize their ties, because UAE recently opened their embassy in Israel and this is a reciprocation of the same. Now this is important in terms of how the relationships have changed, or the landscape of ties and bilateral ties with other countries in Middle East shifted over a period of time in regards to Israel, and what are the implications of such ties in the regional reshaping of power structures. So apart from that, it's nothing more. You have to understand about what are Abraham Accords, who are the signatories of Abraham Accords and why they are significant. So as far as this article is concerned, first, UAE opened their embassy in Israel, and as a reciprocation act, Israel opened their own embassy in UAE. So that's the article here. Thank you. Stay safe. Namaste.
Borthakur IAS Academy. প্রস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা। Borthakur IAS Academy.